Welcome back to Reading with Miss Michelle. Today we're going to read Disney Meet the Robinsons. If you have a copy, go get it so you can read along with me. Don't forget to help us out by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with all of your friends. As a baby, Louis had been left at the 6th Street Orphanage by his mother. 12 years later, Louis still lived there. He had become a smart, curious boy who could invent almost anything, but he couldn't invent what he wanted most, a family. Louis had met with many possible parents, but something always seemed to go wrong. Louis decided to invent something so he could find his mother, and then they could be a family. Louis immediately went to work on an invention to scan his brain for images of his mom. He did research and drew lots of plans, and then he welded, hammered, and sawed. Night after night, Louis's noisy work kept his poor roommate Mike, Yagubian, awake. At last, early in the morning of the school science fair, Louis put the finishing touches on his invention. He called it the memory scanner. Meanwhile, a very tired Goob headed out for his championship baseball game, hoping he could keep his eyes open. At the science fair, Louis lifted his invention onto his table. Suddenly, a strange boy reached out from the blanket covering the table and yanked Louis underneath. Huddled next to Louis's invention, the mysterious boy introduced himself. Special Agent Wilbur Robinson of the Time Continuum Task Force. He explained that he was from the future and he had come to protect Louis from a tall man in a bowler hat. Suddenly, Wilbur jumped up and tackled the suspect, but it was just a boy. In the chaos, the real bowler hat guy and his robotic hat Doris sneaked towards Louis's invention and tampered with it. When the judges got to Louis, he explained how his memory scanner worked. But when Louis turned on the memory scanner, the machine didn't work as planned. It started to shake. The fan on top flew upward, hitting the lights, which set off the gym sprinklers and ruined all the other science projects. The science fair was a complete mess. As everyone fled the room, the bowler hat guy stole the memory scanner. Upset, Louis fled to the roof. Wilbur followed him and explained again that he and the bowler hat guy were from the future, but Louis still didn't believe him. To prove himself, Wilbur pulled Louis into an invisible contraption. When Wilbur pushed a button, a sleek, shiny machine appeared around them and blasted off into space. "Where are we going?" Louis shouted. "To the future," Wilbur exclaimed. All of a sudden, they burst through a bubble of light as colors swirled around them. When Louis looked out of the window, everything had changed. Tall buildings gleamed below. People soared past in flying vehicles. He was in the future. "With this time machine, you can take me back in time to see my mom," Louis exclaimed. Wilbur was unsure, and they started to argue. Louis tried to grab the time machine controls. In the struggle, the time machine plunged into the ground. Dizzy but unhurt, the boy stared at the wrecked machine. "You have to fix it," Wilbur said. "Only if you promise to take me to see my mom," Louis replied. Wilbur reluctantly agreed. "Deal," he said. Meanwhile, Bowler Hat Guy and Doris went straight from the science fair to Inventco. Bowler Hat Guy proudly showed off the memory scanner, telling everyone it was his own invention, except he didn't know how it worked. When he couldn't get it to work, he was kicked out of the meeting. "We must find that boy," shouted Bowler Hat Guy to Doris. Only Louis knew how to work the machine. While Wilbur tried to find the blueprints for the time machine in the Robinsons' garage, Louis wandered inside. He met Grandpa Bud, who took him on a tour to meet the rest of the Robinson clan. As they walked into a large room, they heard a blast of music. "That's Wilbur's mom, Franny," said Grandpa. Franny was conducting a band of frogs. "We need someone on maracas," Franny called. Soon Louis was wearing a wacky hat, shaking the maracas and having a ball. He even spotted one of the frogs wearing Grandpa's teeth. The Robinsons were different, but they were fun. When Louis got back to the Robinsons' garage, he and Wilbur studied the time machine blueprints. "What if I can't fix it?" Louis asked. Wilbur told Louis about his dad, Cornelius Robinson. Cornelius was an inventor who never gave up, even when he failed. Inspired, Louis started to work on the time machine, but when they tested the machine, it broke again. Louis was discouraged. Meanwhile, Bowler Hat Guy and Doris searched for Louis at the orphanage. Instead of Louis, they found Goob. Poor Goob had fallen asleep during his game, missed the winning catch, and lost the championship. His teammates had clobbered him and given him a black eye. Bowler Hat Guy gave Goob some very bad advice. Everyone will tell you to let go and move on, but don't. Instead, let it fester and boil inside of you. Goob sighed and said Louis might be on the roof. That led him to the Robinsons' house in the future. During dinner, the Robinsons made sandwiches with the machine. When the machine jammed, Wilbur and his family asked Louis to fix it. But when he turned the machine back on, it exploded, covering everything in peanut butter and jelly. "You failed!" Grandpa Bud exclaimed, delighted. "From failing, you learn," Aunt Billy exclaimed. "From success, not so much." Louis realized the Robinsons didn't think failure was bad. It just meant you could and should try again. The next attempt would be better. Suddenly the ground shook. The walls trembled. Crash! A Tyrannosaurus Rex, controlled by little Dolores on its head, smashed through the window and snatched Louis. Bowler Hat Guy had used the time machine to go back through time and get a dinosaur. As the Robinsons fought off the dino, it snatched Wilbur. Louis grabbed a shovel and jumped into the dinosaur's mouth and jammed the shovel between his teeth. As the boys held on to the shovel and dangled over the dino's gaping throat, Wilbur saw Uncle Gaston's cannon stuck in its teeth. He yanked it free and blasted little Doris off the dino's head. The T-Rex collapsed. Victory for the Robinsons! The Robinsons were very impressed with Louis after that and asked him to join their family. Louis was excited, but Wilbur knew it was time to come clean. He showed the others who Louis was and that he was from the past. They agreed he had to go back to his own time, but Louis didn't understand. "Can I at least go back and find my mom?" he asked. Wilbur promised. Franny turned to Wilbur. "You promised what?" "I was never going to do it," Wilbur said guiltily. Louis had heard enough. It was the worst rejection yet. Wilbur had lied to him. Louis ran off in tears. The Bowler Hat Guy had been listening in and caught up with Louis. He offered to use the time machine to help Louis find his mother, so Louis agreed to go with him. Bowler Hat Guy flew Louis beyond the futuristic city to his hideaway, the old orphanage. Louis repaired the memory scanner, but Bowler Hat Guy did not take Louis back in time to see his mother. Instead, he ordered Doris to tie up Louis. The Bowler Hat Guy ripped off his cape, revealing a frayed, filthy, and much too small baseball uniform. "It is I, Mike Yagoobian," he shouted. "Goob? How'd you end up like this?" Louis exclaimed. Goob's bitterness about missing his winning catch had kept him from being adopted and ruined his life. Meanwhile, Louis had become a successful inventor and had a great family, the Robinsons. Louis was Wilbur's father. As Bowler Hat Guy revealed his revenge plan to pass the memory scanner off as his own invention to ruin Louis's future, Wilbur appeared on his robot Carl to save Louis. After they escaped, Doris and Bowler Hat Guy got into the time machine and followed the trio towards the Robinsons' home. Suddenly, Doris shot a grappling hook at Carl and snatched the memory scanner. Wilbur and Louis were horrified. Carl was injured, and now they were stuck with nothing but the broken time machine. Their entire future was at risk. Wilbur pleaded with Louis to fix the time machine, but Louis didn't think he could do it. Then a swirling black cloud appeared in the sky, and Wilbur disappeared into it. Why? Because back in Louis's time, Bowler Hat Guy had sold the memory scanner to Inventco as his own invention. As he signed the contract with Inventco, the future was changing. Louis went back to the Robinsons' house, but Doris, the true mastermind behind Bowler Hat Guy, had created a new horrible future. Louis went to the garage, jumped into the time machine, and began working frantically to fix it. His hands shook as he connected wires, turned knobs, and flipped switches. At last, Louis was finished. Gasping, he pressed a button. The time machine roared to life, and Louis shot out from the garage. Quickly, Louis flipped switches on the time machine's control panel. He wanted to return to one specific time and place. Louis and the time machine suddenly appeared in the Inventco boardroom where Bowler Hat Guy was signing his name. "Goob, stop!" Louis shouted. Gesturing toward Doris, Louis said, "She's using you, Goob, and once she gets what she wants, she'll get rid of you." When Bowler Hat Guy learned how Doris would ruin the entire future, he tore up the contract. Furious, Doris attacked Louis, but his future self was the one who had created her. As soon as Louis decided he would never invent Doris, she disappeared. Louis went to the future, and since Doris was gone, it had become bright and happy again. The Robinsons came out of the house, and Louis happily ran to them. That's when Cornelius came home. He and Louis recognized each other at once. Cornelius showed Louis his lab, including the memory scanner. It really had worked after all. "So this will be my future?" Louis asked. "If you make the right choice and keep moving forward," Cornelius replied. "You need to get back to that science fair and find out for yourself." After saying goodbye to the Robinsons, Wilbur and Louis climbed into the time machine. Then Wilbur did something unexpected. He flew back in time to the night when Louis had been left at the orphanage. Louis saw a woman gently place a baby on the orphanage doorstep. He wanted to say something to her, but he knew it might change his future. He let his chance go by and watched as the woman hurried away. Wilbur took Louis back to the day of the science fair, and they said goodbye. Before he went back to the fair, Louis went to Goob's baseball game and saw Goob asleep in the outfield. "Goob, wake up!" Louis shouted. Goob blinked open his eyes and made the game-winning catch. His future looked bright. Louis returned to the science fair where one of the judges, Dr. Krunkelhorn, volunteered to try out the memory scanner herself. She set a date on the machine. After a moment, Dr. Krunkelhorn's memories of her wedding day flickered across the screen. Everyone cheered. Dr. Krunkelhorn and her husband Bud adopted Louis and bought a new house with a wonderful room for Louis to work in. It would become his lab in the future. At last, Louis had a family, and he knew his future would be bright, just as long as he kept moving forward. The end. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed listening to this book, and I hope you were able to read along with me. Don't forget to help us out by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with all of your friends. I hope you join me next time. Bye!